My name is Arthur, and I am currently 26 years old. What I am about to tell you happened years ago. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to share this with anyone, not even those closest to me. I knew how it sounded. To the rest of the world, I was just a guy who lost his mind. The official diagnosis waiting for me in that sterile hospital room was acute psychosis. But I have an old hard drive, and on it, a 12-minute unedited raw file that whispers the terrifying truth to me every single night. Now, sitting hundreds of miles away from that godforsaken town, with eyes hollowed out by months of insomnia, I am writing this down. This isn't a story. This is my confession, my official statement, and the only proof of a darkness that I fear will soon come back to finish what it started. It all began in my early 20s, back when I was trying to make a name for myself on YouTube. I ran a channel dedicated to the hidden, forgotten corners of the countryside, abandoned villages and local folklore that map makers seemed to miss. I used to sit in my cramped apartment, bathed in the dim, amber glow of a desk lamp, whispering these chilling dailies into a high-end microphone. People loved it. There was something about putting on headphones and letting my voice give them goosebumps that kept them coming back. As for me, I was entirely detached. I knew the stories I told were nothing more than superstition, old wives' dailies, blown out of proportion by villagers, passing them down through generations. At least, I was sure of that, until I received an email from Oliver. Oliver was an old high school friend who had recently moved to Dover, a small, suffocatingly bleak town out in the Provençe to take over his late father's old lumber workshop. His message was brief. "Arthur, I've got something right up your alley. In the old quarter of our town, there's a mud brick house that's been locked tight for 40 years. It's scheduled to be demolished next week. Inside, there are old storage chests belonging to my grandfather. If you want some killer footage for your channel, get down here. This is the real deal." It was too good an opportunity to pass up. I packed my camera, my audio recorder, and my tripod, and caught the very next bus to Dover. When the bus pulled into town under a heavy ash-gray twilight, an inexplicably knot tightened in my stomach. The houses were suffocatingly close, built of decaying timber and crumbling mud brick. The streets were dead quiet. The only signs of life were the dull, sickly yellow lights bleeding through the dirty windows of the local theater, illuminating the expressionless, hollow faces of the old men sitting inside. Oliva led me to the edge of town, where the house stood obscured by a grove of dead, skeletal poplar trees. It was a two-story structure, its plaster peeling like dead skin, its windows aggressively boarded up. Oliver forced open the rusted padlock on the front door with a heavy groan. The moment the door swung inward, a wave of stagnant humidity, rotting wood, and the suffocating stench of decades of undisturbed dust hit us dead on. "I can't stay here long, Arthur," Oliver said, his flashlight cutting through the thick darkness as he scanned the corners of the room. His voice was laced with a deep, nervous tension. "My dad always warned us never to go near this place. Some dark family history, I guess. Find whatever you need, quickly. You can crash at my place tonight." I let out a dismissive laugh, telling him there was nothing to be afraid of. I just needed to grab some B-roll and inspect the chests. Oliver left, his footsteps fading as he walked back to his car, leaving me alone in the dead silence of the living room. I set up my tripod, framing the shot through the camera's viewfinder. For the first hour, everything was completely normal. The only sound was the occasional, natural creak of the ancient wooden ceiling beams overhead. I stepped in front of the lens, adopting my usual engaging YouTube persona. "Hey guys, today we are coming to you live from an incredibly eerie, abandoned home in the heart of Dover." 17 minutes into the shoot, I noticed an old dowry chest tucked away in the corner, covered by a shredded, filthy rug. I tossed the rug aside and pried the heavy lid open. A pungent, sickening odor immediately bloomed from the dried herbs and tattered rags. Inside, at the very bottom, wrapped tightly in a yellowed, stained shroud, was a small object. I unwrapped it. Inside lay a triangular amulet, cast in lead and heavily sealed. Its surface was carved with intricate, chaotic geometric patterns in archaic script. The edges of the metal were stained with a dark, encrusted residue that looked unmistakably like dried blood. Right then, a sharp, static hiss tore through the monitor headphones wrapped around my ears. I pulled one side of the headphones off, straining to listen. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from directly above me, right behind the ceiling planks. It sounded like bare, wet feet, slowly dragging themselves across the floorboards. "Oliver!" I called out, my voice cracking under the sudden weight of the silence. "Is that you?" No answer. Just that slow, rhythmic, wet dragging sound. Whatever was up there stopped. Right above my head. Primera. Ripped. The camera off the tripod and held it tight, tilting the lens toward the ceiling. Through the beam of my flashlight, I watched a dark, viscous fluid begin to seep through the cracks of the wooden planks, dripping directly onto the open chest below. I reached out and touched a drop with my fingertip. It was warm. The metallic stench hit my nose. Instantly, it was fresh blood. A primal, suffocating panic surged through me. Every rational instinct yelled at me to run, to get out of that house immediately. But that cursed creator instinct kept my finger away from the power button. I moved toward the stairs. The ancient wooden steps groaned aggressively under my weight. When I reached the upper landing, I saw the door at the very end of the narrow hallway standing ajar. A faint, rapid whispering was bleeding through the gap. It sounded like someone frantically reciting holy verses but backward. The words were distorted, guttural, and raspy, forced out of a throat that didn't sound human. I pushed the door open, millimeters at a time. In the center of the bare room, a figure clad in tattered black clothes sat with her back to me. It was an old woman. Her hair was a tangled, matted mess, and her shoulders were jerking in violent, silent sobs. "Ma'am," I whispered, my breath catching painfully in my throat. "What are you doing here?" The house was locked. The whispering stopped instantly. The room blowned into a suffocating, dead silence. Through the sickly green hue of my camera's night vision monitor, I watched the woman slowly turn her head toward me, her neck twisted at an impossible, sickening angle, accompanied by a wet, loud crack of fracturing bone, until she was looking directly backward. She had no face. The skin where her eyes and nose should have been was entirely seamless, sewn shut by smooth, pale flesh. Only her mouth remained a jagged, black, toothless abyss from which that same dark fluid poured continuously. I couldn't even scream. I dropped the camera on the floor and bolted down the stairs, adrenaline coursing through my veins. When I hit the front door, I grabbed the handle and threw my weight against it. It wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Oliver couldn't have locked me in. The key was heavy in my own pocket. As I slammed my fists against the solid wood, a frantic, desperate scratching sound erupted from the chest in the living room behind me. Something was clawing its way out from the inside. I pulled out my flashlight, desperately scanning the boarded-up windows, trying to find a weak plank to tear away. But as I moved, dozens of distinct, overlapping voices began to whisper from the shadows around me. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. Entire house felt like it was breathing, closing in on me. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently in my pocket. It was Oliver. I swiped the screen with trembling, sweaty fingers, pressing it to my ear. "Oliver, get me out of here. The door is stuck. There's someone in the house." I screamed into the receiver to voice that. Answer didn't belong to Oliver. It started with his tone, but slowly decayed into that same guttural, mocking rasp of a faceless, old woman, dissolving into a sickening laugh. Oliver never came to the house. Arthur, the voice purred, you walked into this place, completely alone. You are the guest. We've been waiting 40 years to welcome. Spun around. Floating in the dead center of the pitch-black living room was the sealed lead amulet. It was spinning violently on its own axis, and from every corner of the room, crawling out from the very seams of the walls, came figures with blood-soaked clothes and empty, hollow eye sockets, dragging themselves toward me. I fell to my knees, frantically screaming every prayer I knew, but my voice was completely swallowed by the deafening, malevolent hum vibrating through the structure. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the cold, leathery grip of the faceless woman closing tight around my throat, her breath freezing against my ear as she whispered a single word: ours. The next morning, local villagers found me out in the yard, clawing frantically at the dirt with bloody fingernails, foaming at the mouth. Oliver. There was no record of an Oliver running a lumber business in Dover. In fact, according to local police archives, that house had belonged to a reclusive occultist who, back in 1986, slaughtered his entire family in their sleep and hid their remains inside that very dowry chest. The police recovered my camera from the scene, but the memory card was completely fried, melted from the inside out. But the secondary audio recorder I had clipped to my belt, that survived every single night. At exactly 3:14 a.m., I sit in the dark and force myself to play the file. It doesn't just capture my terrified screams. Beneath my shrieks, very clearly, another voice speaks through the static. It uses my exact vocal cords, but with a horrifying, detached cadence, repeating the same phrase over and over again. The vessel is ours. Arthur, we are just waiting for your soul to finally go dark.